Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Most taxpayers who requested an extension to file must file today. IRS Tax Tip 2020-137, October 15, 2020. Today is the filing extension deadline. Most taxpayers who requested an extension of time to file their 2019 tax return must file today. So the 2019 tax return had some issues with it because it's due in 2020, and we had all the issues in 2020. They extended the original filing date, but they still allowed an extension, but they did not extend the extension date past what it normally is. It's normally October 15th. So the extension date is still today for the 2019 tax returns. After this point in time, so it looks like we're back onto the basic normal schedule for at least the filing requirements for the individual tax returns, unless something funny happens going forward, which is possible these days. In any case, those filing today who also owe taxes should pay as much as possible to reduce interest and penalties. The extension of time to file is not an extension to pay. Taxpayers must be paid on the original due date to avoid any penalties and interest charges. So remember that the extension of time is not an extension to pay. It's an extension of filing requirement. So the point of these items, of course, is to avoid added penalties and interest. So you already owe the tax. It is what it is. That's a sunk cost at this point. So now the question is, how do we avoid getting more payments or penalties and interest topped on top of the tax that's already basically going to be due at this point? You would think basically no matter what. And so there's two categories for that. One is going to be paying on time, and two is going to be the filing requirements. The extension is only an extension for the filing requirements. You still got to basically pay on time. IRS generally wants their money in the year that you actually do the work. So 2019 tax return, they like to get paid quarterly or with withholdings out of something like a W-2 during the year. And you might say if you don't know exactly what you owe, that could be difficult, of course. But the idea is that the IRS wants you to estimate that and pay them, and possibly pay them a little bit more so that you can get a small refund. And that's how you can, and the reason you get a refund, or you shoot for a small refund, is really so that you don't undershoot, which will result in added penalties and interest. So you're trying to avoid added penalties and interest, knowing that the tax itself is basically, it is what it is. That'll be a sunk cost. Here are a few resources on IRS.gov, IRS.gov, the IRS website, to help last-minute filers. Filing for individuals. There's a link to that here. This page includes a link to IRS Free File, which is available through today. IRS e-file is easy, safe, and the most accurate way to file taxes. So they do have a software that you can try to use online with a free file type of software. And if you're under a certain level of income, then it's going to be available to you, and it might be a good tool to basically look into. Remember, as you look into any type of software, you also want to kind of consider, is that software picking up your state requirements as well? So if you have a state requirement, then you want to make sure that you're picking up both the state and the Fed with the same filing, or the same software can help usually to do the data input to create both tax returns. So look into that and keep that in mind. When you're looking at the IRS website, although they could have resources for the state, you're really concentrating on the Fed, the IRS side of things, the federal side of things. So paying taxes, there's a link to that here. Taxpayers should visit IRS.gov/payments to choose a payment option. They can pay online, by phone, or with their mobile device and the IRS.to-go app. Viewing account information, there's a link to that here. Individual taxpayers can visit IRS.gov/account, there's a link to that here, to view their tax owed, payment history, and key information from their most current tax return as originally filed. So you can get a look at your actual filing pretty easily, a lot more easily than it used to be by logging into the IRS website. There are some groups who still have time to file. So there's going to be a few groups that are outside of this filing deadline, very limited number of groups here. Those include members of the military and others serving in combat zones. There's a link to combat zones here. Typically have until at least 180 days after they leave the combat zone to both file returns and pay any taxes due. So if you're in a combat zone, the IRS is gracious enough to extend the deadline. If you're in a combat zone, thank you for your service. Taxpayers in federally declared disaster areas, there's a link to that here, who already had valid extensions may have more time to file as well. So there's a link to the disaster areas if that is applicable as well. More information can be found on Interactive Tax Assistance and IRS Tax Withholding Estimator. There are links to those items here. There'll be a link to this in the description.